Cora Renner hung a blue enamel dipper on the pump handle, the way she did every morning. Behind her, the sky was turning to a wall of brown. She did not pray for rain anymore. She rationed the rope. Hers was the only well that still gave cold water for 11 miles. A man from the Land and Water Company leaned on her gatepost. 40 neighbors watched from their wagons, waiting their turn at her pump. "That well's worth more than everything you own put together, ma'am," he said. "Sign, or the bank does it for you." Then, 3 days later, the company called her mortgage early, and the gaunt farmer across the section road took off his hat. He didn't ask for water, he asked for her hand. "A marriage of use," he said. "Nothing more. So my stock don't die." If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we go on, take a second and subscribe. And comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The town was called Ledger. It sat in the Oklahoma panhandle, where the map goes flat and the wind never learns any manners. This was the autumn of 1935. The kind of autumn that had forgotten what green looked like. Cora Renner was 39 years old. She had been a widow for 2 years back, and the land had been dying for longer than that. You have to understand what the dust had done. The wheat was gone, not thin. Gone, the black dusters had come rolling out of the north 2 summers running, and they had scraped the topsoil off 160 acres like a knife going across a plate. What was left was hardpan and fence posts and a house that ticked in the heat. Every farm for miles was the same. Every farm but hers had one more thing gone, too: water. Cora's husband had been a stubborn man. His name was Silas. When the other men dug their wells down 30 feet, then 40, then gave up and hauled water in barrels 12 miles each way, Silas kept digging. 60 feet, 80 feet. His neighbors told him he was chasing a dead thing. He kept going anyway. At 83 feet, he struck a live vein. Cold water. Sweet water. Water that did not care what the sky was doing. While the whole country turned to powder, Silas Renner had a well that ran full. And he had it because he was too hard-headed to quit at 40 feet like a sensible man. He died 2 years back. A bad heart, the doctor said, though Cora thought it was more than that. She thought the land had asked too much of him. But the well remained. And so did she. Here is the thing you need to know about Cora before you know anything else. She shared it. Every morning she hung that blue enamel dipper on the pump handle, and it meant the same thing to every soul who passed. Drink, fill your barrel, water your poor animals. She never asked a penny. When the Vernons lost their cistern, she let their children fill jugs twice a day. When old Prudhomme's mules went down from thirst, she pumped for 2 hours herself while he rested his arms. The whole county had a debt to that well, and Cora never once wrote it down. You loved her already. So did they. That was the trouble. Because a thing that valuable, sitting in the open, being given away for free, men noticed. Not the neighbors. The neighbors were grateful. The men who noticed were the men in the good hats, the ones who came from the county seat with leather folders under their arms and arithmetic where their hearts should have been. Now, across the section road lived Silas Renner. Same last name, no relation. That was a joke around Ledger, back when people still made jokes. 2 Renners, 1 road between them, and the road may as well have been the ocean. Silas was 44. He had gone to the Great War a young man and come home an older one, the way they all did, and he had built himself a farm out of grit and a bank loan. He had a herd. He had a stand of wheat once. He had a way of not talking that some people mistook for meanness and that Cora, who watched more than she said, understood was something else. Silas had no water. His well had gone to mud at 30 feet. His stock could smell Cora's well on the wind. That is a true thing. Cattle can smell water a long way off. And every evening his animals walked the fence line and stood there and loaded a wetness they could not reach. 40 fence posts between his gate and hers. His cows counted them all day with their sad eyes. And Silas was too proud to cross that road with his hat in his hand. He was mortgaged to the same company that held Cora's note, the Cimarron Land and Water Company. He was going under, same as everybody, only he was going under within sight of the one thing that could have saved him, and that is a particular kind of cruel. So that was Ledger, that autumn. A dying country. A widow with the only live well for 11 miles, giving it away for free. And a proud, quiet man across the road, watching his life walk the fence. Now the men in the good hats. The first one came on a Tuesday. His name was Ovid Thane, and he was an agent for Cimarron, and he had a smile that he put on the same way another man puts on a coat. He didn't lean on the gate that first day. He was polite that first day. He stood in her yard and admired her well like it was a painting. "That is a remarkable piece of water, Mrs. Renner," he said. 83 feet, I'm told. Your late husband had vision. He had a strong back, Cora said. Was there something you wanted? Thane wanted to buy it. Not the land. He was clear about that, and Cora would remember that he was clear about it. He wanted the well, the water rights. He named a figure that would have sounded like a fortune to a woman who wasn't paying attention. Cora was always paying attention. The land's no good without the water, she said. And the water's no good sitting in your books in the county seat. What would you do with it, Mr. Thane? Cart it off? He smiled the coat smile. We'd manage it, he said. For the region. A resource this scarce ought to be managed, not given away to anyone with a bucket. There it was, the thing under the thing. It's not managed, Cora said. It's shared. There's a difference, and you'd need a heart to know it. Good day. He tipped his hat and left, and Cora thought that was the end of it. It was the beginning of it. 3 days later, a letter came. The Cimarron Land and Water Company, holder of the note on the Renner Quarter section, was calling that note. In full. $528, due by the 1st of November. She stood in the kitchen and read it twice. Then she counted the days on the wall calendar with her finger. 9 weeks. 9 weeks to find $528. In a county where a man was lucky to see $1 of cash money in a month. She went to the coffee tin behind the stove. She kept her money there, what there was of it. She counted it out on the formica in the morning light. $41. That was every cent she had in the world. $41 against $528. She did the arithmetic, and then she sat down in the hard chair and did not cry, because crying was rope she could not spare. She understood exactly what had happened. She had told Ovid Thane no. And Ovid Thane worked for the men who held her paper. You do not sell us the well? Fine, then we take the whole thing, well and land together, at auction, for pennies, and we cart the water off after all. It was not personal. That was the worst of it. It was arithmetic. Now here is the small moment that mattered more than anyone knew at the time. Word got around, the way it does. Old Prudhomme came by for water a few days after the letter. The same Prudhomme whose mules she had saved. He was pumping his barrel full and shaking his head about the note, and he said a thing offhand. The way old men say the most important things offhand, with their minds half on the mules. Course, he said, Elias always did things his own way. You know he filed the well separate. Cora looked up. Filed it how? Separate paper. Prudhomme worked the handle, water rights its own deed. He filed it apart from the land, down at the courthouse. Said a man's water ought not to be chained to his dirt. I remember him laughing about it. Prudhomme lifted his barrel. The land can go, and the well still be yours, girl, if a body reads the fine print. Anyway, thank you kindly for the water. And he drove off, and Cora stood there with the words sitting in her hand like a coin she hadn't looked at yet. Then the pump needed working, and a child came for a jug, and the day ate the words the way days do. She forgot them. Hold on to them. She forgot them. But you shouldn't. The next part is the part the whole county talked about for a year. Silas Renner crossed the road. It was the second week of October. His stock was dying now, not slowly. He'd lost 2 head that week. His wheat was a memory. He had gotten a letter of his own from Cimarron, and though he never showed it to a soul, Cora would learn later it said the same cold thing hers did. He came at evening, when the light was going honey-colored and long. He walked the 40 posts of his own fence line, and he crossed the road, and he came up her yard with his hat already in his hands, which for a man like Silas was the same as another man getting down on both knees. Cora watched him come from the porch. She did not go to meet him. She let him make the whole walk. "Mrs. Renner," he said. Mrs. Renner, a little dry. The joke of the names. He turned his hat by the brim, around and around. He was a man looking for the door into a sentence he didn't want to say. "I'll say it plain," he said finally, "because I don't know how to say it any other way, and dressing it up would insult us both. My animals are dying. 14 days, I lose the herd. I lose the herd, the bank takes the farm. And I've got nothing left of 18 years' work but a hat." "I'm sorry for it," Cora said. And she was. "I've told you, and I've told everyone. Bring your stock. Water them. I don't charge. That's not." He stopped, started again. "A man watering his cattle at a neighbor's well, that's charity. The company can read that. Charity doesn't hold up. But a man watering his cattle at his wife's well, he looked up at her for the first time. That's a household, that holds up." Cora went very still. "And your land," he went on, faster now, getting it out. "Empty land, widow's land, that reads to the auction judge like a thing already gone. But land that's worked and occupied, a household with a man on it running stock, that reads different. It stalls them. Maybe stalls them long enough to fight the note." So, her voice was flat as the country. "You're proposing marriage. I'm proposing a use." He said it carefully, like he'd practiced it. Because he had. "A marriage of use, Mrs. Renner, nothing more. My stock water's legal at your well. Your section reads worked and occupied to the judge. We buy ourselves time against the company, the both of us. I'll sleep in the barn. I'll work your land like it's mine and take not one thing I don't earn." And when the danger's past, he turned the hat. "Well, we'll see what's what." There, now you know why she said yes. Not for love. She'd have laughed at the word. She said yes for the same cold reason he asked. Because $41 was not $528. Because a worked section stalled the auction. Because 2 people fighting Cimarron might last a season where one would not. And under all of it, though she'd have died before she said so, because she was tired of being alone in that ticking house, and a hard bargain was easier to admit to than that. "All right," she said. "A marriage of use." "All right," he said. And they stood there, 2 people who had just agreed to the strangest thing either of them had ever done, and neither of them had the first idea what to do next. So Cora did the only thing she knew how to do. She walked to the pump. She took the blue enamel dipper down off the handle. She worked the pump twice and filled it with cold water, and she carried it back and held it out to him. Silas looked at it. Then he took it. He drank. He drank like a man who had been thirsty for 18 years, and maybe he had. And when he was done, he handed it back, and she drank from the same dipper, and that was the whole of it. No words. Their first shared drink. It was, though neither would have called it so, the most tender thing that had passed between 2 people in Ledger all that dry year. They married at the courthouse the following week, and I want you to see it the way the town saw it. It was a Saturday. Ledger's Main Street, what was left of it, the barber pole not turning, the 5 and dime half empty, the movie marquee with 3 letters missing. The wind was up. Grit in everybody's teeth. Half the county found a reason to be at the courthouse that day. They stood along the steps in their patched Sunday clothes, and they watched Cora Renner marry Silas Renner. and you could have cut the judgment with a knife. Because they had it figured out, all of them, every way but the right way. Half of them looked at Silas, gaunt, ruined, hat in hand, and figured Cora had sold herself. A woman with the only well for miles, taking up with a busted neighbor twice foreclosed? She'd bought herself a hired hand and put a ring on it, they said. Because a widow gets lonesome and proud won't warm a bed. The other half looked at Cora and figured Silas was the shrewd one. He hadn't married a woman, they said. He'd married a well. Cleverest thing a drowning man ever did. Wait for the water to get desperate enough and marry it. Both halves were watching. Neither half was kind. And then it got worse. Because standing at the front of that crowd, in a good coat, was Del Amsel. Del was Cora's late husband's younger brother. Elias's kin. He'd been sniffing around since the funeral, all duty and safety and I only want what's best for you, and he had never once looked at Cora without also looking at the well behind her. As the judge was fixing to begin, Del spoke up. Loud, so the whole crowd would hear it. Because that was the point. Cora, he said her name like he had a right to it. You don't have to do this, I'll pay the note. Every dollar. 1st of November, paid in full, you'll never see the inside of that auction. A pause, for the crowd. Sell the water rights to Mr. Thane, fair price, and take the Amsel name back where it belongs. Merry family. Not. And he let his eyes go to Silas, up and down, slow, not this. The crowd made a sound. A low sound. Everybody looked at Cora. She looked at Del Amsel a long moment. Then she looked at Silas, who was standing very straight and very still, taking it, the way a man takes weather. Judge, Cora said. Go on. That was her whole answer. Go on. And the judge went on, and they were married, and the town filed out into the wind, having watched a woman refuse a paid note and a safe name to marry a ruined man. And not one of them understood what they had seen. They thought they had watched a fool, or a schemer, or two desperate people clinging to a rock. They had watched the beginning of the only true thing in the county. But that comes later. Now the marriage began, and the marriage was work. Silas kept his word to the letter. He slept in the barn the first weeks then, when the cold came, in the hard chair against the kitchen wall, and Cora noticed, the way she noticed everything, that he slept sitting upright. She thought little of it then. She would think a great deal of it later. He moved his stock over. The cattle drank at her well, and something went out of their eyes, that fence-line desperation, and they got quiet and started to fill out. 2 head he'd have lost. He didn't lose. That was the first small victory, and small victories were all they had. But Silas did not water his animals and leave it there. That was not the man. The well mouth had been failing. Elias had cribbed it with timber long ago, and the timber had rotted, and the wind had worked at the edges until the whole rim was soft and dangerous. Cora had known it for a year and had no way to fix it, and no money to hire it done. She'd just been careful, rationing the rope. Not standing too close to the edge. Silas fixed it in 3 days. He never asked, he just started. He tore out the rotten cribbing and cut new timber. Where he got it she never knew. She suspected he pulled apart his own barn, and he recribbed the whole mouth square and solid. Then he took down the old frayed pulley rope that could have let a bucket drop on somebody's head, and he strung new rope and he redressed the pulley so it ran smooth and quiet. Cora came out one morning and the well she had been afraid of for a year was safe. Just, safe, fixed, and Silas was already gone to the stock, not waiting to be thanked, because being thanked would have made it charity, and this was not charity. This was a man taking care of the thing that was keeping them both alive. She stood at the new rope a long time that morning. Something was moving in her that she did not have a name for and did not want one. That was the second proof. There would be more. The third came at a bad price. The dust brought sickness with it. It got into the lungs, dust pneumonia they called it, and it killed as many as any fever that year. Old folks and babies and grown strong men who breathed too much of the black air. Silas had lungs the war had already ruined, though he never spoke of the war. One night in the second week after the wedding he came in from bringing the stock through a duster, and his breathing was wrong. By midnight it was a wet, tearing sound. By the small hours he was burning up, sitting in the hard chair because he could not lie down, fighting for every breath like a man pulling a rope hand over hand. Cora did not sleep. She built the fire up and got a kettle going, and she steamed the air by his chair, and she sat up with him through the whole black night, wiping the grit and the sweat off him, holding the cup when the coughing eased enough to drink. And somewhere in the deep of that night she understood the thing about the chair. "You never lie down," she said quietly. He was too sick to guard himself, even well. "You sleep sitting up. Every night since you came, in that chair, sitting up like you're waiting for something." He didn't answer for a while. His eyes were closed. Then he said, so low she almost missed it, "Can't lie down. Since France. Comes on me if I lie down in the dark. The feeling of the—" He stopped. "Can't lie down. That's all. 17 years. 17 years he had not laid down in the dark and slept like an easy man, and no one had known it, because he had never let anyone close enough to see. And now, half out of his head with fever, he had told her, because she was the one person who had sat close enough in the dark to notice. Cora held the cup to his mouth. "All right," she said. "Then I'll sit up too, tonight. You're not waiting alone." And she did, and by morning the fever broke, and his breathing came back, ragged but his own. And something had changed in that kitchen that neither of them would have been able to explain to the judgment on the courthouse steps. They had been married by paper. That night they became partners in earnest. The third proof. The most expensive one. After that, the arrangement quietly stopped feeling like an arrangement. It was small things. It's always small things. They stopped keeping 2 sets of accounts and started keeping one ledger, on the kitchen table, both their figures in it, his stock, her land, what came in, what went out, the terrible short column that was supposed to become $528 by the 1st of November and was not getting there. They took their meals at the same table. They fell into the rhythm of 2 people running one place. She'd hear him at the well before light, the new rope running smooth over the redressed pulley, watering the stock in the cold. He'd come in, and there'd be coffee. Nobody said much. Nobody had to. The town watched, and the town's certainty began, very slightly, to crack. You cannot fake a working household for long, and the Vernons and the Prudhommes and the ones who came for water saw 2 people who moved around each other like they'd been doing it for years. It confused the gossip. Gossip hates to be confused. And Cora, being Cora, did not just wait for the auction. She fought. She got out the company's papers. All of them. Elias's original note, the letters, every scrap Cimarron had ever sent, and she spread them on the kitchen table under the lamp, and she read them the way she read everything, slow and twice, and paying attention. And on the second week of October nights, going through that stack, she found the paper Prudhomme had told her about, and she'd forgotten. The Wells Water right deed. Filed separately in the county book. Its own paper. She read it 3 times to be sure she understood it. And then she sat back in the hard chair and let out a breath she'd been holding for 2 years. The well was not part of the mortgage. Elias, stubborn, hard-headed Elias, had filed the water right on separate paper, apart from the land, years ago. A man's water ought not to be chained to his dirt. So the note Cimarron held was against the land, the 160 acres, the house, the dead wheat. Not the well. Never the well. They could take the whole quarter section at auction, and the water right would still be hers. Deeded in her name alone, and a section without water in the panhandle in 1935 was worth about what the dust on it was worth. They didn't want the land. They had never wanted the land. They wanted the well, and the well was the one thing the note could not touch. Cora almost laughed out loud in the empty kitchen. She had leverage. For the first time since the letter came, she had a real card in her hand. She took the water right deed and she did not leave it in the stack. She hid it away, careful, somewhere only she knew, because a card like that you do not leave lying on the table. But even as the relief moved through her, another thought came in behind it. Cold. The way the second duster always comes in behind the first. If the company knew the well was deeded separate and men like Thane knew everything, then buying the land at auction got them nothing. So how did they ever plan to get the water? You cannot foreclose on it. You cannot call it in a note. The only way Cimarron ever got that well was if the person who held its deed handed it over, signed it to them willingly, and who, in the last months, had come across the road and worked his way, day by day, drink by drink, fixed rope by fixed rope, straight into the household that held that deed? Cora sat very still. She thought about Silas getting his own letter from Cimarron, the one he never showed her. She thought about how a drowning man will sign anything. She thought about the proposal, how it had come so exactly when the pressure was highest, how neat it was, how reasonable, a marriage of use, my stock don't die, and her section reads occupied. And she thought, what did you sign, Silas Renner, before you ever crossed that road? She did not know. She wanted, badly, not to know. Because for the first time in 2 years she had begun to believe she was not alone. But the question was in the house now. It had come in with the second duster, and it would not leave. She looked at the hard chair against the wall where he slept sitting up, waiting for something in the dark. And for the first time she wondered what, exactly, he was waiting for. The lamp guttered. Outside, the wind was building again, testing the windows, the way it did before the worst of them came. She folded the company's letter along its old creases and set it down. 9 weeks had become a matter of days now. The 1st of November was close. And somewhere between the well she owned free and clear and the man asleep upright in her kitchen, there was a paper she hadn't seen yet. She just didn't know, that night, that the sky was about to give her no time at all to look for it. Because at noon the very next day, the wind was going to stop being wind. It was going to turn black and stand up like a wall a mile high and come for all of them at once, and out in the far pasture, Silas's best cow was going to go down to calve in the dark at exactly the wrong hour, on exactly the wrong day, and Cora was going to have to decide, with the deed hidden and the question unanswered, and the whole county still watching, whether the man across her kitchen was worth walking into a black blizzard to save. She banked the fire. She looked at the sleeping man one more time. And she did not yet know what she would choose. The wind held its breath for 3 days. That was the worst part, Cora thought later. Not the roar when it came, but the waiting quiet before it. The chickens went off their feed. The mules stood with their tails to the northwest and would not turn. Old man Prudhomme came by for a dipperful on the second morning and looked at the sky the color of dishwater and said only, "It's building something," and did not stay for talk. On the 3rd day it came at noon. She was at the pump when she saw it. A wall. Not clouds. A wall, brown and boiling, standing up off the earth to the top of the sky, 80 feet, 100, higher than a thing had any right to stand. It came on across the flat, with the light dying in front of it. Chickens ran for the coop on their own. The hens knew. She hung the blue dipper on the pump handle out of long habit, and then she heard it, under the hush, a cow, far off, bawling the way a cow bawls when it is down and cannot get up. Silas's cow. The far pasture. The breech calf he'd been fretting over for a week. She did not wait to be asked. That was the thing she understood about herself only after, standing in the memory of it. There was no moment where she decided. Her hands were already moving. She took the new rope Silas had coiled by the door. The good rope. The one he'd made for her pulley before he made himself well, and she tied one end to the fence post by the well house and the other around her own waist, hard. A double hitch her husband had taught her a lifetime ago. She took the lantern. She lit it against the dark that was coming. and she walked out into the throat of it, paying the rope out behind her, hand over the top wire, post to post along the fence line toward the sound. The wall hit her at the fourth post. It was not like weather. It was like being buried standing up. The light went out, not dimmed, went out. Noon turned to midnight in the space of a breath. And the dust came into her nose and her mouth and the corners of her shut eyes, and the wire under her glove was the only thing in the world that was still true. She pulled her collar over her face. She breathed through the wet wool. She counted posts. 5, 6, the rope dragged and caught, and she yanked it free and went on. 12 posts to the far gate. She had counted them 100 times, bringing water to his stock. She counted them now in the dark with her eyes shut and the grit singing against the lantern glass. At the gate the rope came tight. She'd reached its end. And through the roar she heard him. Cora. Not a question. Not surprise, even, her name, flung once into the dark, as if he'd known she would come, and was only marking where. She got the gate. She got through. And there he was on his knees in the boiling brown with the cow down on her side, her legs stiff out, and the lantern light making a small dirty room in the middle of the end of the world. Silas's face was black with it, streaked where the sweat ran, and his ruined lung was working. She could hear it, that wet catch under the wind, but his hands were steady. Deep in the poor beast, feeling for what was wrong. "Breach," he shouted. Backward, hind feet turned under. "I can't. My hands are too big, I can't turn it." "Move," she said. He looked at her. Then he moved. She stripped her glove and went in to the wrist, to the elbow, into the terrible heat of the animal, and the cow groaned and heaved and near broke her arm, and she felt it. The little cannon bone, the folded hock, the calf-jammed hind end into the world like a drawer put in wrong. She worked her fingers along the leg the way you feel for a knot in the dark under a bed. Silas held the lantern and held the cow's head and talked to it low. Some soldier's voice from France. Steady, steady, and the dust roared, and Cora found the second foot and eased it back, and then forward, straight, the way a leg should point. "Now," she said. "Now pull." When she pushes, we pull. They pulled together. His hands over hers on the wet, slick legs, both of them braced, the cow bearing down, and it gave. All at once it gave, and the calf came out into the dust in a rush of water and blood, dark and still into the light of the one lantern. Still, she cleared its mouth with her fingers. She rubbed it with the hem of her own skirt. Hard. The way you're not supposed to be gentle. Silas bent his cracked face down to it and blew a breath into its nose. 1, 2. His own bad breath into a new one, and the calf coughed. Shuddered, kicked, lived, and Cora Renner knelt in the black blizzard with a live calf steaming in her lap and her husband's hand gripping her shoulder so hard it would bruise, and neither of them said one word, because there were no words that would not be smaller than the thing that had just happened. They got the cow up. They got them both into the lee of the dead cottonwood, and the wind screamed over and did not stop screaming for 2 hours. They sat with their backs to the tree and the calf between them for warmth, and the rope, still tied to Cora's waist, running off into the dark toward home, and at some point Silas took her bare hand, the one that had done the work, still fouled with it, and held it, and did not say why, and she did not ask. When it thinned enough to see the next post, they walked home along her rope, hand over the wire, the calf carried in Silas's arms against his chest. That was the day the arrangement ended. Neither of them named it. But the arrangement had been 2 people watering their stock at the same well. And what walked home along that fence line was something else, and they both knew it, and neither of them had the first idea what to do with the knowing. The winter closed in after. It was a hard, clean cold with no more moisture in it than the dust had, and they lived through it the way people live through such things, one chore at a time. But now there was one table, one ledger, His accounts and hers in the same hand, her hand, because his was better with a rope than a pen, and the coffee tin behind the stove with its $41, which did not grow, and the note that came due the 1st of November, which did not shrink. $528. 9 weeks had been the number when it started. Now it was less. Now it was weeks she could count on her fingers. So she fought it the only way a woman with no money can fight a company. She read. She went through every paper Cimarron had ever sent, the mortgage, the assignment, the notice, the demand, and she went through them at night by the lamp while Silas slept upright in his hard chair against the wall. And she read the fine columns of interest the way she'd once read scripture, looking for the place where it did not hold. And on a night in the second week of October she found it. They had overcharged the interest. Not by much. That was the cunning of it. A quarter point here, a compounding there, figured monthly where the note said yearly. Small enough that no widow grinding under a foreclosure would ever stop to check it, but she checked it. She checked it 3 times. She took Elias's old figures and Silas's and her own, and she ran the whole thing back to the day the note was written, and the company had charged, across the life of the loan, $41 more than the paper allowed. $41. The exact figure in the coffee tin. She sat with that a long moment and did not know whether to laugh or be sick. The note was unlawful. A note figured wrong was not enforceable as written. Prudhomme's boy who'd gone to town for the law had told her that much once, offhand, the way people tell you the things that save your life without knowing they've done it. She had it. On paper, in her own hand, checked 3 times, she had the thing that could break them. She woke him. She could not help it. She shook his shoulder and he came awake all at once the way soldiers do, one hand already up. "It's wrong," she said. "Silas, the notes figured wrong. They overcharged. I can prove it." He looked at the ledger where she pointed. He was not a numbers man, but he was not a fool, and she walked him through it line by line, and she watched it land in him, watched the thing that had been a wall for 2 years turn, in the lamplight, into a door. He laughed. She had never heard him laugh, not once, in all the weeks. It came up out of that ruined chest rough as a cough, and it was the best sound she'd heard since Elias died. And he said, Cora, her given name, the first time, plain, like he'd had it in his pocket the whole while waiting for the right morning. "Cora, we might just live." And that was the autumn. The town softened around them by inches. Toms carried the word from farm to town and back, and the word was that the Renners had found the company out, and men who'd tipped their hats to Silas out of pity now tipped them out of something else. Silas mended the dented rim of the Blue Dipper with a bit of solder and a careful hour. So it hung true again on the nail by the door. She caught him one gray morning pouring his own drinking water, his ration, his cup, over the dead-looking roses by the kitchen wall, Elias's roses, that had put out 3 red blooms the second summer they were married, and nothing since. Watering roses in a drought, before his own thirsty stalk. She stood in the door and watched him do it, and said nothing, and something in her that had been standing braced for 2 years sat down at last. She loved him. She knew it the way you know the note is figured wrong, checked 3 times, no way around the sum. She loved him and had not said it, and neither had he, and they went on not saying it. 2 grown people made shy as children by the size of the thing while the 1st of November came on. Then she found the paper. It was nothing. That was how these things come, nothing. She was after a tar receipt, the one for the barn roof he'd patched, because the ledger wanted the figure and she was a woman who balanced to the penny now. His strongbox was on the shelf. He'd told her where the key hung. She'd no more thought of prying than of stealing. She turned the receipts out onto the table looking for tar, and under the deed to his dying farm and his discharge from the army, and a photograph of a woman who must have been his mother, folded once, in his own bad hand, and another hand she knew, Ovid Thane's hand, she'd seen it on the demand, was an option. An option to purchase. The Cimarron Land and Water Company granted the first right to buy the deep well on the Renner quarter section, water rights and all, at a price named at the company's pleasure. Signed, Silas Renner. Signed and dated. 2 weeks before he proposed. She sat down. She had to. The chair was there, and she found it. 2 weeks before he crossed the road with his hat in his hands and asked for a marriage of use so his stock wouldn't die, 2 weeks before that, he had promised her well to the company. The company that was foreclosing her. He had signed her water away to Ovid Thane, and then he had come and married her and moved his stock onto the well and rebuilt its cribbing with his own barn lumber. And re-roped her pulley, and pulled a calf with her in the dark, and watered her roses. A long con. The longest, patientest con a starving man ever ran. Marry the widow, deliver the well through her own bed. And she had let him. She had opened the door and handed him the dipper and let him. She did not cry. She was past that country. When he came in from the stock with the cold coming off his coat, she was sitting at the one table with the option paper squared in front of her. And he saw it, and he stopped in the door, and all the blood went out of his face. Cora, you didn't marry a widow, Mr. Renner. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. After, dry and level as the ground. You married a well. And I let you. Cora, that paper. I signed that a starving man. I came the next morning to tell you don't. She stood. Don't tell me what you came to do. I've had 2 years of men telling me what they came to do. She got her coat. She got the blue dipper down off its nail and set it on the table beside the paper. Because she did not want it. Because it was his courtesy and not her home. Delamsel offered to pay the note. He offered honest, sell the water, take his name, keep the land. At least his want had my name on it and not just the wells. She got to the door. I'll be at Dell's. And she went out into the dark to the man who wanted her for safe, sensible, wrong reasons, and left the man who, but she would not finish that thought. She drove the mules the 11 cold miles with the stars hard overhead, and she did not finish it once. The auction was the 1st of November, on the courthouse steps, at 10 in the morning, in a haze of blown dust with the sun a dime behind it. 40 wagons came. The same 40 that had watched her marry. Ledger did not have more than 40 wagons worth of people to spare for a thing, and it spared all of them for this. They came to see the widow's land go under the gavel. They came the way people come to a hanging, ashamed and unable to stay home. Ovid Thane stood at the front in a good coat with a leather folder under his arm. Patient, brand clean. The company wearing a man's face. Delamsel had Cora up on his wagon seat, respectable, his coat over her shoulders, and she sat there stone still and let him. Because she had said she would, and because she had nowhere in the world left to sit. The auctioneer read the notice. The Renner quarter section, 160 acres, and improvements, and the deep well thereon. Sold to satisfy a note of $528 held by the Cimarron Land and Water Company. He asked for an opening bid. And Silas Renner stepped out of the crowd. He'd shaved. That was the thing Cora saw first, from the wagon. He'd shaved his face raw and put on his one coat, and he walked up the courthouse steps slow, favoring the lung. And he turned at the top and faced the 40 wagons, and he took off his hat. Before there's a bid, he said, the county ought to hear the note read right. The auctioneer looked at Thane. Thane smiled the smile of a patient man and said, the note's in order. It's not, said Silas. He unfolded a paper. Cora's paper. Her own hand, her figures, checked 3 times. My wife keeps the books. She's better at it than your company hoped. He read them out. He was no reader, he went slow, and the wind took some of it, and he read it anyway. Every line, the mortgage figure and the interest the note allowed, and the interest Cimarron had charged, month by month, back to the beginning, to the sum at the bottom. $41, he said, over what the paper allows. Charged to a widow. That note's figured false. A murmur went through the wagons like wind through wheat. There wasn't any wheat. The clerk standing right there, Silas said. Let him check the figures. He had to. 40 wagons were watching, he had to. The county clerk came out with the note and the book, and he sat on the top step with the two papers, and he ran the sum with a stub of pencil while 40 families held their breath, and it did not take him long, because the arithmetic was Cora's, and Cora's arithmetic did not miss. He stood up. He was an old man, and he did not much like the company either. "The figures are wrong," he said. "Notes overcharged. Can't be enforced as written. This sale can't proceed on this note." Dane's mouth worked. For one moment the patient brand clean face was just a face, and under it something small and cornered, and he said. It was all he found to say. "This isn't finished." "It is," Silas said. And then Silas Renner did the thing the county talked about for the rest of their lives. He took a second paper out of his coat. Cora knew it before he unfolded it. The option. Her well, promised to the company, in his own bad hand. He held it up so they could all see it. "I signed this," he said, loud as his lung would let him, 2 weeks before I asked that woman to marry me. Signed it to this company, first right to buy her well. I was starving and my stock was dying, and Ovid Thane put a paper in front of me and I signed it. He let that sit. 40 wagons, silent. And the morning after I signed it, I woke up sick with what I'd done, and I crossed the road to tell her, and I lost my nerve. I married her instead and told her nothing. I've been a coward about one thing in my life, and that's it. He tore it. He tore it top to bottom, and the wind out of the northwest took the two halves out of his hand and rolled them off the steps and out into the road and into the dust, gone. And he watched them go, and then he turned back to the wagons. "I'd sooner lose every acre I've got," he said, "than hand one dipperful of that woman's water to this company. The well's hers. It was always hers. It's deeded separate, in her name, and they can't touch it, and neither can I. And thank God for that, because I'd have made a fool's trade to save a barn." His voice cracked, and he let it. "The stock can die. I've watched stock die. I've watched worse than stock die, in France." He found her on Dell's wagon. He looked at her over the heads of the whole county that had judged them both. "Cora, I can't picture the place without you." The wagons turned. 40 families turned on their seats to look at the widow on Del Amsel's wagon with Del Amsel's coat on her shoulders. Del stood up beside her. He was not a bad man, Del. He was a safe man, and safe men have their own kind of pride. "Cora," he said low, "for her, my offer stands. The note paid, the water sold, my name, a roof that doesn't leak. He signed your well away. Don't forget that standing here." And Cora Renner looked at the safe man's hand held out to her. The note paid, the sensible life, the coat that was warm. And she looked across the 40 wagons at the man on the steps who had just torn up the only thing he had to sell and told the whole county he was a coward so that not one drop of her water would go where it shouldn't. She took Dell's coat off her shoulders and folded it and set it on the seat. "Thank you, Dell," she said. "You offered honest. I'll not forget it." She climbed down off the wagon. "But you offered to buy a well." He tore up the chance to. She walked across the courthouse yard through the blown dust, past the 40 wagons, up the steps, and she stood in front of Silas Renner where everyone could see, and she said the only word the day needed. "Stay." He did not grab her. She'd have thought less of him if he had, with the town watching. He just breathed out, that long ruined breath, and put his hat back on his head, and offered her his arm, and the two of them walked down the courthouse steps together through a county that did not make a sound. And then old man Prudhomme, who had no more sense of an occasion than a fence post, called out, "Well, hell, somebody give 'em a cheer." And somebody did, and then all of them did. 40 wagons of dust-poor people cheering a widow and a coward on the steps of a foreclosure that wasn't going to happen. They went back to the registrar that same afternoon. She'd have Silas tell it that they went to fix the papers, and that was true. The old arrangement, his stock, her well, the marriage of use, it read wrong now, the way the note had read wrong. And Cora Renner did not leave things reading wrong. So they stood before the same registrar who'd married them cold, and they signed 2 new papers, and this time it was not a marriage of use. Her name went on his farm, His name went on her land. And the well, the deep well Elias had dug to 83 feet and struck the live vein and filed separate, in a clean hand, so that no company could ever take it, the well they held in common, both names, held together. Which was a thing you could not undo with any option any starving man ever signed, and they both knew it, and they signed it slow, and the registrar, who had seen a great deal, said it was the only wedding he'd ever done where the bride checked the arithmetic first. It rained in April. Not much. This was still the panhandle, and God was not handing out miracles by the bucket. But it rained a slow gray 2 days that soaked in instead of running off, and the section came up green at its edges, a thin brave green along the fence lines and around the well, and the roses by the kitchen wall put out 3 red blooms in June. 3. The same 3. As if they'd been waiting all along for a reason. The company left the county. That was all. It's usually read out on the courthouse steps before 40 witnesses and carried by every wagon to every farm for 11 miles. Cimarron Land and Water found the panhandle unfriendly, and Ovid Thane's good coat was seen boarding the eastbound at Ledger Station one flat morning and was not seen again. He did not say goodbye. Men like that never do. Delamsel married a schoolteacher from Gaimon the next spring and sent no more offers. He tipped his hat to Cora in town, and she tipped hers back, and there was no bad blood in it, only the small permanent distance between the life a person offers you and the life you choose. He'd offered safe. She'd chosen the man who watered roses in a drought. The blue enamel dipper hangs by the door now, not the pump, the door. Cora moved it herself, off the nail at the well where it had hung for anyone passing, to the nail by the house door where a body has to come inside to drink from it. It had been a stranger's courtesy once, cold water for whoever the road brought. Then it was a mended cup 2 hands drank from in the dark after a calf lived. Now it is what hangs by a home's door. And when neighbors come the 11 miles for water, they still come. The well is still the only live one for miles, and the Renners still give it free. Because that is what the well is for. They drink from the dipper and hang it back by the door, inside, where the warm is. 2 pairs of hands work the one section now. You'll see them out past the well of a long evening, the tall bent man and the wide-shouldered woman, one plow between them. Her hands and his on the same worn handles, turning what little the sky gives them into what a life is made of. He still can't sleep lying flat. She still sits up with him the bad nights and steams his lung over the stove. He still reads slow. She still checks the arithmetic. It is not a soft life, and it was not a soft love, and neither of them would trade 1 dusty acre of it. Some things are deeded to one person alone. A well, dug deep by a good man, filed on separate paper so no company could steal it. And a woman who owns it and gives its water away and was worth, it turns out, more than all the land around her and everything a company could put a price on, to the one man who finally understood that he had not married the well at all. That's the whole of it. That's the story of the only well for 11 miles, and the widow who sat on her land and would not sell it, and the Dust Bowl farmer who married her cold and stayed warm. Wherever you're watching this from, comment your town. I want to see how far this story travels. There is one thing left to tell, and it is small, and it is the truest part. The rain came in March, the way rain comes to the panhandle when it finally decides to come, not apologizing for the years it withheld, not announcing itself, just arriving one gray morning as a sound on the roof tin before anyone thought to look at the sky. Cora heard it first. She was at the stove with the coffee just beginning to smell right, and she stood still with the pot in her hand and listened. When Silas came in from the barn, he found her standing at the open door, watching the yard go dark with wet. And he stood behind her and put one hand flat on the doorframe above her head and watched with her. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that the rain was not saying better. By April the section had a green edge on it, not the green of before, Not the wheat-thick roll that Cora remembered from her first year with Edmund, but something more careful. Grass first, low and new. Feeling out the ground as if not entirely trusting the invitation. Silas planted sorghum where the wheat had burned 2 summers running. Because sorghum forgives a dry year in a way wheat refuses to, and Cora thought that was the right decision and said so. Which was a thing she would not have said to any man 8 months earlier without first making sure she could also afford to be wrong. Tom's Guerra went to work for the Hendersons 3 miles north when the Renners no longer needed a hired boy. The farm ran on 2 people now, and there was not enough left for a third wage without strain. He came back the first Sunday of each month for the noon meal, because Cora cooked the kind of meal a 20-year-old boy could not forget. And because he had been there for most of it and felt a proprietary interest in how it turned out. He sat at the table and watched the 2 of them argue pleasantly about the sorghum spacing and thought, in the private way a young man thinks things he would not say aloud to a woman 20 years his senior, that he had known it would go this way before they did. Thane left the county in May. There was no announcement and no forwarding address, and the Cimarron Land and Water Company's office in Boise City closed with nothing on the door but a nail hole where the sign had hung. 3 other sections they'd held notes on came back to their owners after the county clerk examined the interest calculations against the state statutes. It was not a dramatic end, and it should not have been. Lawful wrong done by paper should end by paper, quietly, without anyone being required to feel it like a story. Del Amsel sent a letter in June. Cora read it alone and burned it in the stove the same morning, and when Silas asked that evening whether the mail had brought anything, she said it had not brought anything worth keeping. He nodded and did not ask more. He understood the Amsel portion of her life was a thing she carried and would set down in her own time, and he was not going to stand in the road of that. Both their names went into the county registry book that October. On the land and the well both, inked side by side in the clerk's neat hand, Silas Renner and Cora Renner née Amsel, the sections listed. The well recorded separately as it had always been. And this time, the column for co-owner was not blank. The clerk asked if they wanted a copy for their records, and Silas said yes, and paid the $1 without being asked twice. He folded it into the front of the farm ledger, the one Cora kept, between the page where she'd found Cimarron's error and the page where she'd begun entering his medical costs without noting what they were for, as if disguising a kindness as an expense. 11 miles is a long way to haul water in a dry year and a short way to drive it in a good one. The neighbors still came. That did not change. What changed was the length of time they stayed after they drank.